Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
And happy Wednesday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Mike Ottenweller. It is August 26, 2015, and you've tuned into Alaska Weather, where we're going to take you around the state and give you the most up-to-date weather information. As always, you can follow us online at www.arh.noaa.gov, and that'll give you the regional perspective from all three offices. Our weather info line is 24/7, and that is 1-800-472-0391. Weather.gov/Alaska is another way to keep up to date. Facebook at NWS Alaska will give you all three offices as well. Looking for us on Twitter, you can use the hashtag AKwx, that's Alaska Weather, and our call sign is at NWS Alaska. And then you can find this show and a few other weather segments on our YouTube channel, AKwx TV. Check it out later on tonight for this segment. So let's jump into our hazards, and as you can see here, we have a fairly active map. For the most part, we are dealing with coastal issues in the form of flood advisories and high surf advisories along the coastal sites due to a storm system that is moving up from the Bering Straits up into the Chukchi Sea. And with that, we also have some strong winds, so some of these are strong wind advisories or high wind advisories as well. For the Northeast Brooks Range, we do have a winter storm warning, and that will go into effect from midnight tonight until midnight Thursday night, and that's for areas above 2,000 feet. And if I'm not mistaken, I haven't not checked the archives, but this could be the first winter storm warning from any of the Alaska offices for 2015. So kind of a historical note there. And then again, mostly just wind advisories for the coastal locations. This is a wind advisory for the Middle Tanana Valley, and this is until 10 p.m., effective from tonight until 10 p.m. on Thursday night. And again, for the latest on all of these, you can check out our website, arh.noaa.gov, and you can find out the latest information for your location. So looking at our satellite imagery now, you can see here we have our area of low pressure that we just talked about, and that is spinning from west to east, and it moves up through much of the coastal sites and then on inland. That's where we're getting those high winds, and some of that colder air is going to start to wrap in where we see that winter storm warning. And let's take a look at that one more time. Plenty of moisture associated with these systems that have kind of surged up over top of this ridge here down by Unalaska, and has surged up over the ridge and into much of South Central Alaska and certainly up into the interior and northern portions of the state, bringing those strong winds and helping to encourage the higher surf along the coastal areas. Taking a look at our visible imagery now, you can see here towards southeast Alaska, a fairly nice day. Mostly sunny skies from basically Sitka eastward through Juneau and Ketchikan. Fairly nice day there as high pressure that was over south central has parked itself over southeast Alaska. That will be short-lived though, as we do expect these higher and mid clouds to start to move from west to east later tonight. Taking a look at that loop one more time, you can see again our area of low pressure just up here off the Seward Peninsula, and plenty of moisture into much of the mainland portion of the state. Just a few breaks here for southeast, and that higher pressure starting to build in over the eastern and central Aleutians, and with that we'll start to see some clear skies. Short-lived though in the afternoon hours, as we do expect some fog to develop and marine stratus to develop as we move into the overnight hours. So let's take a look at today's weather map, and again, here is our area of light rain that's associated with that strong westerly moisture surge. Most of the flow following these lines of equal pressure, and it's basically been traveling up from the western Pacific all the way across the Bering and then into western Alaska. Few places have been able to stay dry today because of some downsloping off of the mountains, but for the most part, even Anchorage has picked up a couple hundredths of an inch of rain, and much of the interior, some more steady rain up there, all the way up through the Brooks Range. Places all reporting rain this afternoon. Nobody has reported snow, but we do expect to see that change over into tonight. Again, for southeast Alaska, we saw mostly clear conditions for much of the day today, and our low pressure system down here south of the area will just continue to be a non-factor for much of Alaska. As we look out towards the west, here is another area of lower pressure and warm air surging northward. This is going to keep this widespread fog and marine stratus pretty much in play through the rest of the week for the Bering, eastern Bering and Bristol Bay area. We do see some northwesterly winds starting to push some rain into the Bristol Bay and northern portions of the Alaska Peninsula, and then our area of low pressure that's helping to swing some colder air. This is kind of where I want you to focus for the next couple images here. These cold fronts are going to start to become a little bit more aggressive, and each one will have a better chance to push further south as we go into tonight. So here's this one. It starts to break apart, sends a weak area of energy that's going to move through south central, and as we see these cold fronts develop and push further south, we will start to see some winds increase for southwest Alaska, winds increase through the gaps of south central Alaska, and we'll start to see a little bit colder air, especially once those winds die down and we start to see skies clear out into the weekend, expecting some colder temps to move in. But for now, we're just expecting that rain-snow mix to remain up along the Arctic coast, and again, another area of low pressure develops right on the backside of this, and with that, we do expect some more fog, widespread areas of fog up for the Brooks Range as well. Here's our area of high pressure at 1,037 millibars, and that's going to help to keep fog in the forecast, but also some calm winds for much of the eastern Aleutians. And then over southeast Alaska, we'll start to see that light rain push in as we go into the overnight hours. Taking a look at Thursday now, we did have an area of lower pressure develop overnight and into Thursday morning at 997 millibars. With that, we just expect some more onshore flow and a little bit of warmer air to push into southeast Alaska. Here's our first week cold front that will sweep from southwest through south central Alaska, and that's where we expect to see those winds start to increase. Kamishak Gap, Shelikof Strait, the Barren Islands, that's where we'll expect the heaviest winds, but certainly Seward, Valdez, and Thompson Pass can also get in on the action. Here's our next cold front lining up on Thursday, and we're starting to see a little bit more just pure snow start to move into the northwestern portions of the state. Showers as we have some weak ridging moving in over the mainland on Thursday, but we will see that steadier precipitation move down from the northwest. And then out over the Bering, we just expect those areas of fog and warm air with some light rain out for the western Aleutians. As we get into Friday's forecast now, we see our area of low pressure down to 991 millibars off of southeast, keeping onshore flow and light rain in the forecast there. Don't expect any strong winds to really make it into that area, but MVFR conditions associated for flying with this area of low pressure. And again, we have that northwest flow following those isobars down into the Gulf, and that's where we'll keep those gap winds going on Friday. And then this next cold front queued up and ready to move, again, from northwest to southeast. The Alaska Range will help to buffer some of those, but they still will make an impact throughout much of the state from north to south. Some of this moisture still riding up and over top of this ridge, and that's going to help to keep things fairly wet for southwest Alaska. And then again, another warm front out over the western Aleutians, keeping fog and rain in their forecast. So taking a look at today's high temperatures, we can see that much of southeast Alaska got into the mid to upper 60s, with Juneau topping out at 71 degrees. A couple locations there along the coast at 63, a little bit cooler along the waters. 57 at Yakutat, 56 degrees at Cordova, and 57 at Middleton Island. As we look up towards the interior, we were mainly in the 50s all the way up until the Brooks Range here, and then we had some just north of the Brooks Range, even climbed into the low to mid 40s as that warm air is helping to keep things relatively mild up there for this time of year for late August. Out over the Seward Peninsula, saw conditions mainly in the low to upper 40s, 58 degrees there at Nome, and a fairly warm day as well for those locations. As we look out towards southwest Alaska, we could see 61 degrees there at King Salmon, 53 degrees at Bethel, and out towards the Alaska Peninsula, we even had some warmer temperatures with Dutch climbing all the way to 70 degrees this afternoon out over the eastern Aleutians. 59 and 57 for Atka and Adak, and 55 at St. Paul, 49 degrees way out there at Shimia. As we take a look at tonight's low temperatures, with all that cloud cover, expect things to be fairly mild overnight tonight, mainly in the low 50s to upper 40s for much of southeast Alaska, and then we'll see anywhere from the upper 40s to lower 50s for south central. Not until we get north of the Brooks Range do we expect things to drop into the 30s, and again, that's fairly mild for this time of year up there with all that cloud cover and warm air. Now look at the rebound tomorrow, though, is not very good, only climbing into the low 30s for many of those areas as that cold front does sweep through and helps to bring some colder and drier air into those locations, so don't expect as warm of a day tomorrow up there. Low 60s for much of south central Alaska, in the upper 50s for southwest Alaska, and for southeast expect anywhere from the upper 50s, mid upper 50s to low 60s as you get a little bit closer to Dixon Entrance. So now for our flying weather, we expect a fairly wide area of IFR conditions underneath that high pressure out over the Bering Sea. That's going to help to keep that marine stratus and fog, making difficult flying conditions out over the Bering Sea and out towards Bristol Bay. As we stretch up with that warm air moving along the coastal areas, we do see some MVFR conditions stretching all the way back down east of the Yukon River Valley. And then towards south central Alaska and southeast Alaska, we have a fairly widespread area of MVFR conditions as we have that onshore flow and that developing low pressure system helping to bring some lower ceilings into those areas, especially Chilkoot and White Pass. And with that, let's take a look at our passes. And in Tuvik, we expect to be IFR tomorrow due to low stratus. Adigan will be the same. Lake Clark and Merrill should see conditions improve from MVFR to VFR, but the worst conditions will be on the west side of those passes. Same for Rainy, improving from MVFR to VFR through the day, but worse conditions on the western entrance. And Windy should go from MVFR to VFR. Isabel, marginal to visual flight rules. Mentasta, same story. Tanita, same story. Portage will be the same situation there. And Chilkoot and White, we do expect MVFR there throughout the day with that low pressure moving onshore. So now jumping into our freezing levels, you can see all that warm air has really pushed a good long ways up into the mainland portion of the state. Our surface area of freezing levels is now located just along the Brooks Range there, where we have that winter storm warning in effect above 2,000 feet. And otherwise, we're climbing all the way up to 14,000 feet, courtesy of these strong surges from the south out over the Bering Sea. As we look at our icing associated with these low pressure systems, we do see that colder air keeping a light to isolated moderate above 3,000 feet over the northwest portion of the state. And then out over the Alcan border, area above 6,000 feet, again, just light to isolated moderate, and above 9,000 feet for that area of low pressure as it pushes some warmer and moister air onshore for the southeast portion of the state. Looking at the jet stream now, this is where it gets interesting. This is where we have what we call our northern tier of the jet stream, or our Arctic jet stream, at 120 knots, dropping in basically straight from the northern portions of Russia. And this is a coupled jet right here over southwest Alaska, the Bristol Bay area, at 120 knots. This is where we have our most significant energy really vamping up as these two jets come together and help to really provide some dynamic lift in the atmosphere. So that's why we've seen a lot of the cloud cover and rain today over southwest Alaska. Here's our area of high pressure making a ridge out over the Bering Sea at 75 knots. And then we have this cutoff area of low pressure, which is just supported by a jet finger at 115 knots going in a counterclockwise direction. And then finally our jet moves off into Canada in the lower 48 at 60 knots. 9,000 foot winds, as you can see, moving over this area of higher pressure, coming around here from northwest to southeast at about 25 knots. And then a little bit stronger as you get south of the Aleutian chain there, associated with these former typhoon remnants, at about 50 knots out of the south, and then becoming 25 and 50 knots, becoming northerly at 30 knots as we get towards the central portion of the Gulf. A little bit of a jet supporting that area of low pressure at 9,000 feet, 35 and 20 knots. And over the state, mainly westerly to northwesterly flow at about 40 knots, including for southeast Alaska. 3,000 foot winds coming out of the northwest, 30 to 25 knots, and becoming southwesterly and then southwesterly as you get into Canada. And again, flowing over the ridge counterclockwise direction at about 15 to 30 knots for much of the eastern Aleutians. So for our turbulence, we just have a small area below 6,000 feet along the Alaska range. A couple spots here where we have that northwest flow interacting with terrain below 4,000 feet for light isolated moderate. And then below 4,000 feet, this is our area of most concern here, occasional to widespread moderate with a stronger jet finger out over the western Aleutians. Stay tuned, we'll be back with your marine segment.
Weather balloons here at Fairbanks International Airport are released by the Weather Service twice a day, and the timing of those releases are such that they are coordinated with all the other releases around the world. And that data then, which provides a vertical profile of temperature and relative humidity and pressure in the atmosphere, is then integrated into the forecast models run by the by the Weather Service.
How can you forecast the temperatures when an inversion is present? It is a difficult puzzle. In Fairbanks, often the weather forecast says today, clear skies, high temperatures from 20 below to 10 above, coldest in the valley and mildest in the hills, a 30-degree range. This is not uncommon in the interior winter. It's a difficult puzzle to try to put very precise numbers. We need a broad range because within that shallow layer, you go from such cold temperatures to such warm temperatures. That's just the way it is here in the inhabited elevations of interior Alaska. Well, anything you want to forecast, including a temperature inversion, has to be studied. You have to learn how the inversion works in order to forecast its future behavior. And part of learning how it works involves gathering data. And every day out at the Fairbanks International Airport, a weather balloon is launched. On the end of the balloon is a thermometer, up it goes, and we get the vertical profile of temperature in the atmosphere. And that's real good data. You can see the inversion with that. Problem is, the weather balloon only goes up twice a day. And for forecasting, detecting and forecasting the jet stream, which operates on broad spatial and temporal scales, twice a day is, for most purposes, adequate. However, down here in this fine spatial scale right in urban Fairbanks, we need more than twice a day to really understand the inversion, especially its formation and its dissipation.
So the weather balloons that are released at Fairbanks International are timed with all those other global releases, and they are not actually at times which are very dynamically active here in Fairbanks, which is another reason that we're interested in doing this experiment with an aircraft and also additional weather balloon releases to sample some of those more dynamically active times of the day.
Basically, in preparing the sondes, you have to take the sonde out of the package, prepare the sensors, and then you'll fill up the weather balloon, then need to calibrate the instrument inside. So that's the most important part of balloon preparation. So when we're calibrating the instrument, we make sure that the temperature of the sensor is realistic with the temperature either of the room or outside, wherever the sonde is being calibrated, as well as pressure, making sure that's at our level, and also the relative humidity, that looks realistic. We use these weather balloons that when they're filled up with helium, they're approximately 6 feet wide. And by the time that they reach the top of the atmosphere where the balloon pops, they're about 20 feet wide. So they're huge. It's hard to even imagine. After we get clearance from the FAA, we'll go outside, take the radio sonde, attach it to the balloon, and then make sure there aren't any planes going by just in case, and let her go. And the computer inside actually picks up the signal automatically. It'll tell you exactly when the balloon was launched, and the data will come processing in from there. After we launch the balloon, I'll go back inside the building and to make sure that the data that's coming in on the computer looks realistic, making sure the pressure decreases with height, the relative humidities look realistic, and in my cases, looking at temperature inversion, that the temperature is increasing with height. Typically in the atmosphere, we see temperature decreasing with height, but in these special cases, that's what I'm looking for. And then I can watch as the temperature progresses vertically into the atmosphere, as that sensor's rising, and I can see where the top of the inversion layer is. So the National Weather Service currently launches weather balloons twice a day, but I wanted to launch weather balloons more frequently than that to see what was happening between those launches. So I wanted to take a look at what's happening between that 4 p.m. launch and that 4 a.m. launch, and then what's happening between the 4 a.m. and the 4 p.m. So I launched these weather balloons every 2 to 3 hours to gain a better temporal resolution of what's going on in the atmosphere.
Our research asked the question, what will surface-based temperature inversions look like in Alaska over the next 100 years? And the primary tool for studying future projections are global climate models. In fact, they're the only tool. But they're not perfect for answering our question because we're interested in information over a city landscape scale, which is a few miles, 5 miles, 10 miles. Global climate models provide information on a 100-mile scale. So we need to get that information from this coarse scale and downscale it to a higher resolution so it's useful for us. And the way we do that is we take climate information from the global climate model and we feed it into our regional model, which has a domain over Alaska, at a resolution of, say, a few miles instead of hundreds of miles. And the large-scale climate comes from these global climate models, and then we run our simulation over Alaska. We have done regional downscaling simulations for 20 years in the 20th century, from 1979 to 1999. We've done 10 years from 2010 to 2019, and then from 2050 to 2059, and 2090 to 2099. So with the regional model, we've taken these 4 slices over time, fed by the global climate model. And what we find, first of all, in the 20th century simulation is that the regional model does a much better job of simulating the vertical surface-based temperature inversions over Fairbanks and the other cities in Alaska. And as we go through the 21st century, those 3 other slices, as the global climate warms, we find that the temperature inversions in the lowest layer don't really change in strength. The strength stays the same, but the whole profile gets warmer. So this study provides a first look at what would be happening to temperature inversions in the future. We need to ask other questions like, how will this frequency change? Will they occur as often? Will the season be much shorter? There's a variety of other questions we need to ask to develop a better picture for how temperature inversions will change in the future. And our first cut answer that we have suggests that we'll still have to worry about the same sort of air quality issues, because in the near surface, the strength of the inversion will be about the same.
And welcome back for your marine forecast. Let's jump into our sea ice. You can see here we have started to open up some fairly large areas where there is now open water and not seeing much sea ice. We also are starting to see, with that stronger wind and stronger flow along the southern edge, some rather large chunks are breaking off of that and starting to move around. So if you're a mariner out in these areas, be aware of that. Some of these thicker 6 to 8 foot chunks of ice are moving around, and they will continue to do so with 40 to 55 mile-an-hour winds expected. We also could see some of that ice start to push along the coast here, especially near AKwx over the next 5 days. So residents in the area of AKwx should keep an eye on the sea ice forecast for the next several days. For southeast Alaska, on Thursday we expect gale force winds out of the south for Lynn Canal, seas at about 7 feet, and south to southeast winds 20 to 25 knots for the southern portions there, 4 to 5 foot seas. Out over the open waters, expect west to southwest flow, 20 to 25 knots, and seas between 5 and 7 feet. Coming out of the north now on Friday for Lynn Canal at 30 knots, and southeast for the southern portions of the inner passageways, 20 to 30 knots, and seas 4 to 6 feet. And then out over the open waters, a little bit more variable, southwest southerly becoming east and northeasterly as you get towards Yakutat, 15 to 25 knots, and seas building now with stronger winds offshore at 9 feet. And then as we get to south central on Thursday, expect mainly west to northwest flow throughout the entire area, a little bit stronger over the Barrens and eastern Barren Islands, 40 knots there, and a little bit lighter up in Cook Inlet and the Prince William Sound, 15 to 20 knots there. Seas building through these areas up from 11 to 13 feet with those stronger winds, otherwise generally in the 4 to 8 foot range. On Friday, we see most everyone along the southern portions go from west to northwest, and then we keep northerly winds with offshore flow with that developing low pressure, anywhere between 20 and 40 knots for this area, and seas will be strongest down here near the Barren Islands at 12 to 13 feet. Looking towards the Alaska Peninsula now, straight westerly flow for the entire area, 20 to 35 knots on Thursday, and seas between 7 and 9 feet. And on Friday, expect west to northwest winds, 20 to 35 knots, strongest south of Chignik, and seas between 5 and 8 feet. As we get to the Aleutian Islands, expect mainly west to southwest flow becoming southerly for the central Aleutians and then southeasterly for the western Aleutians. Our stronger areas of low pressure are off to the west, and that's where we see the seas building all the way up to 16 feet. Otherwise, seas generally between 8 to 11 feet on the southern portions and 6 to 7 feet north of the chain. On into Friday now, expect west to southwest winds for the eastern Aleutians, southerly winds for the central, and southeasterly for the western Aleutians, anywhere between 15 and 30 knots. Again, highest seas are going to be out over the western Aleutians at about 15 feet. As we look towards the west coast on Thursday, northwest winds predominantly, a little bit more westerly as you get towards the Pribilof Islands, anywhere between 20 and 25 knots, and seas between 8 and 10 feet. Then on Friday, we switch things from west to southwest as that area of warmer air pushes on shore. Winds between 20 and 30 knots and seas 5 to 9 feet. And then up toward the Arctic coast where we have our most severe conditions right along the northwest portions here by Point Lay and Wainwright, 40 knots out of the west and northwest and seas all the way up to 15 feet. So that's what's going to move that ice around. And then all around the rest of the Arctic coast, we expect northwest 20 to 25 and westerly at 35. Seas between 8 and 12 feet. On Friday, we start to settle things down just a little bit, keeping things out of the west and northwest, 20 to 30 knots, and seas generally between 6 and 10 feet. So recapping tonight's weather, we expect some light rain to start to move into southeast Alaska, replacing the clear skies that they've been seeing most of the day. Colder air starting to sweep in from the northwest and bringing some rain and snow mix. Lots of fog as we get to the west coast and much of the eastern Aleutians underneath this area of high pressure. And then as we go into Thursday, expect this first cold front to bring a first start of gusty winds from the northwest as we see things start to funnel through the gaps there. And then our second cold front will queue up along the Brooks Range for Friday. And that's where we see that start to push down a little bit further south and bring some more winds into Friday as we start the state fair for Alaska. Thanks for joining us this evening.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.